is actually showing why this constitution is not just a bad constitution, but also why it was wrong for politicians to just take it upon themselves to then say we are going to come up with a constitution for Zimbabwe. And I want to take particularly, he corrected himself, says in fact he wanted to say it was not important what that provision was saying, but he was separating the provision itself from the constitution, as if there is something called a constitution which does not include this provision, and that there was this huge or big cry for a constitution. That is not correct. That's from the NCA perspective. It's not correct. The politicians were pushing for a particular type of constitution for themselves, which is why this clause, when it gets to be implemented, everyone gets shocked. And then when people get shocked, they get shocked because they never debated these things. And that's the lesson we must get. And actually, just for the record, this clause has always been part of the Zimbabwean constitution from 1989. It was actually a provision that we would call it the Tekere clause. It was brought in by President Mugabe to deal and still remained a member of parliament despite leaving ZANU, because the longest house constitution, our independence constitution, did not have such an undemocratic provision. So President Mugabe was shocked to find that Tekere would still sit in parliament. And he is the one who demanded an amendment to the constitution. Unfortunately or fortunately, Tekere himself was not affected by it. The first person who left parliament because of this provision is Munyara Tsukwisai. In other words, the first political in 2002. It's very important for us to know. So by 2013, it was already part of our law, and what would have been required would have been for Zimbabweans to debate it and then find whether they would like it or not. So I agree with Dr. Gordon Moyo when he says he doesn't like it, in fact, now, and that if he's given an opportunity, he would want. If Zimbabweans had been given an opportunity in 2013, this clause would not have been part of the constitution. Now, Dr. Mabe, there are 14 ways in which a member of parliament may lose his or her seat. So it comes as K, but it starts in A. So if you start A, B, C, D, you go on until you reach K. Each of those ways are ways in which people lose their seat. So MPs would vacate their seats. This additional point is now put specifically to empower political parties. In other words, to say an election is about us as political parties. That's my view. I did it deliberately. He knows why I'm saying that, because we've been together for a long time. I want him to come open and say that it was a mistake in 2013 for the politicians of the time to have railroaded this constitution without giving Zimbabweans a proper opportunity to debate the constitution. Those are my submissions or contributions.
Thank you.
Ideally, that should be a question debated in a constitution-making process by the people and say, look, would you want a political system where you recall? Because a recall by definition means a recall by someone. So we should have recalls. It's not a question of whether we should have recalls. I think people will say they want recalls if an MP has proven the interest, but it is whose interest. I don't think we should have recalls at the instance of political parties, but we must have recalls, I think, at the instance of a bigger body, which is, I think, what Dr. Mo is also saying. The Ugandan one, you justices have been studying constitutions very recently, and I'm sure you might know the recent positions. But I know that the Ugandan constitution used to provide a very clear provision for a recall, but this would be a petition by the electorate. It's a rigorous process which goes through to the... Very useful for Destiny to have run the initial point. There is one person there who said they were not missing their council because the councillor was elected for a particular political party. And then the councillor never went to anyone else. He became, I'm sure that councillor was a Chamisa Chetechet, that person, and so on. That's what that candidate was saying, that person was saying. So you are elected. As I thought of, so I saw they were urban people. that were speaking, and that the MDC controls. I mean, the councillor must be an MDC councillor. So I can withdraw the Chamisa Chetete, but I must retain the fact that that person was saying that the MDC council in that area was not going back to the people. He was going back to the MDC people. That's what I want. And that's a very relevant point. If a recall is at the instance of political party, we also send the message that elections are about political parties. Yet we elect individuals, although sponsored by political parties. Some of them are independent. Who will recall Mr. Muliswa, for example, under the current constitution? There will be no one. But he's an MP in Norton. He may be doing very well. There might be people in Norton who think he's not doing well, but he's completely, as an independent, protected from a clause like. See my point. My point there is then you discriminate between MPs. If an MP is elected on a party ticket, then they are subject to recall. If they are not elected on a party ticket, then they are immune from any sort of recall. And I think these are the debates that would have taken. So I agree with you. I withdraw my CCC. But then I would insist in saying that recalls must be there, but it must be at the instance of a body broader than a political party. Start from this position that if we follow closely what Jacob Mafumo was saying, he actually loves that provision, because he doesn't want to come out openly. He loves the provision. He simply believes that the provision is being misapplied. I have listened to all his attempts to try and come up with, but he's clearly saying, look, political parties must be allowed to recall their members. They should be able to do that. I think that Obed is also saying the same thing, that the only problem with this provision, from Jacob's point of view, it is because it is being misapplied. In other words, if we follow Jacob closely, he thinks that the speaker might be the problem. Because it is the political party that is splitting into all these different factions and so forth. When I indicated earlier on, my position was that the clause itself, the very idea of allowing political parties to recall a member of parliament elected, is what I would think, and that's what the NCA thinks as well. But let me get to the person who has asked that question. Dr. Mavedzenge, I think I should share a personal issue here. I was the first that had been affected by that clause in the Constitutional Court. And today I must clarify that I've had 3 clients in the Constitutional Court. The first group of clients that I had, it was Didmas Mtasa and Themba Muliswa, who had been recalled from ZANU-PF. And the argument I took to the Constitutional Court was more along that question. My clients, Didmas Mtasa and Themba Muliswa, had actually Ignatius Storm. They also were arguing that they had not been given an opportunity within ZANU-PF to challenge their expulsion. We were told by the Constitutional Court that that clause does not have room for that. And so the Constitutional Court, in its wisdom, said to Didmas Mtasa and Themba Muliswa, that clause would not wait for you to challenge the Speaker. That's the end of the matter. Then my next clients were Tendai BT, Miss Matuenga, Sekai Holland, Matzimure, and others, about 21 of them who had been recalled from Parliament by the MDC led by Dr. Morgan Changere. My argument in that case was to say, look, there are 2 factions of this party. These were calling themselves MDC Renewal. And that the court, the person who wrote that letter at that time was Douglas Monson, who is now president of the MDC. He was writing as the MDC Secretary General. The Constitutional Court, again, 9 judges, said that the Speaker had no business going into that, a whole question. Then the next client of mine was Thokozani Kupe, just before the 2018 election. She had been recalled from Parliament by the MDC led by Nelson Chamisa. In that case was that my client is actually the leader, because she was claiming then that she was the lawful person to remain the president. Again, the Constitutional Court said, look, we don't go into those questions. Now, I can go on and on. Now, with other clients, they are somewhat different. But the issue that has come out of the Constitutional Court is that the Speaker has no business questioning all those. If he receives a letter which he believes, then the vacancy occurs. So that's why the clause is problematic question. Obviously, you must not be recalled by a party other than the party to whom you belonged at the time of election. But who decides that this letter is coming from? Let me take you to my first example. Who decided that Ignatius Chombo's letter was the authentic letter from ZANU-PF in the first case that I told you about? Or who decided that Douglas Monzola's letter was proper letter? Because those in person to write the letter. Then in the third case, Chokozan Cooper was saying it ought to have been from her, not from Morgan Comey. Now, if you get in and bring in, I know the case that you have in mind and what many people have in mind is this letter that was written by a person saying that they are the Secretary General of the PDP, the one who recalled Tendai Pete and the other 5 people. And I think people are saying, well, the Speaker ought to have known that this gentleman is not. So, unfortunately, it is not me saying these things. It is the Concord that has said, the Speaker gets a letter. He simply reaches a conclusion that this letter is the appropriate letter. If he believes it's the appropriate letter, then the vacancy occurs. But I'm sure he can go and challenge the Speaker one or the other. But that is for the court to determine whether the Speaker was, the belief was sensible or not. We still haven't taken that angle. It has not arisen in many cases because the cases that have appeared in the courts at the moment, the Speaker's receipt of a letter that he believed to have been the proper letter has been taken. And that is where the issue is. I hope that Zimbabweans realize the difficulty of having a constitutional provision which is dependent on some very difficult interpretation by the highest court. And that is always the problem that we have. So I think I've answered that person to say the courts have told the Speaker not to go into the details that the person who has posed the question wants the Speaker to do. The Speaker believes that he's going in, and in this very unique situation where a letter comes from someone, I think when we went to court in one of the recent cases involving Tapita Kumalo, I think it's Tim Vias. Tim Vias has now joined ZANU-PF. One of the judges of the High Court, Justice Mafusire, made the point that you are making, just saying, look, it can't be just any letter, which means that I must advise people, decisions of the courts can be changed. In other words, we can go back to the Concord and convince it that it was wrong. And someone can go back to the Concord. But as things currently stand, the Concord has taken this very inflexible position. He believes it's coming from the proper party. That is the end of the matter.
Yeah.